Welcome to Encouragement for Living Life with Lockwood and Lockwood. The guys are here to encourage you in your attempt to live more confidently and successfully in our world. They are highly trained and experienced mental health professionals, but they are not your mental health professional. They are sharing encouragement through information and discussion. People are complex. Just because an idea helps one person doesn't mean it will help someone else. You need to consult with your own professional who will hopefully know what is best for you and your situation. Now, it's time for Lockwood and Lockwood.
Hello again, our audience. And I was trying to figure out why my headphones weren't working and I hadn't turned them on. Anyway, son, I didn't tell you this, that my good friend is now in serious condition back in the hospital.
Sure.
His antibodies are turning on his blood.
Yeah.
So he goes from the mildest leukemia, which is highly treatable, to not hardly being able to breathe because his red blood cells are getting destroyed.
Yeah.
Very serious, when your body's turning on itself. And so your mom and I will be going to see him tomorrow, and but he's on oxygen, and he's having a hard time, so
yeah.
I'm sleeping well about it, but I'm not sure my gut's doing well with it. That's where my feelings are going, which may be a good for our topic today, which is overcoming anxiety. And
okay.
So, I got a couple pages of notes here just to go over some basic things with people.
Sure.
Then we can freelance as we want to, but I think people need to at least learn some basic things about anxiety, because a lot of people don't even know what the heck anxiety really means. And I joke with people a lot about anxiety. Well, tell me how you're really feeling. I don't want to hear the word anxiety. Because anxiety to me is a state. You made up of a bunch of other things that we call anxiety. But the definition I got for this came from the American Psychological Association. We'll see what you think of your own folks' definition. It's a feeling of fear, dread, and apprehension, often accompanied by physical symptoms like raising heart rate, sweating, tension, which typically occur in response to stress or anticipated threats. So that's the general definition they became. It becomes a disorder when what is going on is extensive and persistent and interfering with daily life. Then it becomes, in the APA's jargon, a disorder. Symptoms of anxiety: excessive uncontrolled worry, restlessness or feeling on edge, a rapid pounding heart can be, difficulty concentrating or mind going blank. It can interfere with memory, insomnia or trouble sleeping. In general, it could be insomnia, or just could be hard staying asleep, and usually you don't oversleep with anxiety. That's with depression, too. So those are some symptoms for people that they can, if they can identify with those, they kind of recognize that that's what anxiety looks like symptom-wise, and not always that. And also, I always add, too, that people can have anxiety from being very angry, not just afraid, but they can be anxious because they have all this pent-up anger, and it's not okay they don't know what to do with it, and it just kind of rumbles around inside them and makes them anxious, too. So it isn't just fear. You'll usually see fear, usually a lot of fear, in people that creates anxiety, but it also can be other things, too. They can be trapped with sadness and hurt, not know how to express those things, but they got all this stuff boiling around inside them that ends up producing physiological symptoms too, like, that come out as quote-unquote anxiety. And so, put down one of the things I read here on the internet was the number one consequence of anxiety that I didn't think of. I wouldn't have thought of it, I didn't see it. Avoidance. People that are really anxious tend to avoid dealing with things that are difficult to deal with.
Right.
Which kind of makes sense, right? You think about it. And then the causes of anxiety, this kind of genetic, and which goes along with biological factors too to some degree, but our genetic makeup, some people can be going through all kinds of fear, all kinds of dread, and not be anxious at all. have
Yeah.
no symptoms of anxiety. They're just built differently,
Yep.
or they have better coping mechanisms, or they've internalized a great and have a strong ability to self-soothe whatever's going on with them. So genetically they're predisposed to not become anxious. I'm not saying pretty much anyone probably can become anxious, but some people are more resistant to it than other people are, just like depression and other things too, obviously.
Right.
Well, biological factors, illness can make a person anxious physically. Certain kinds of illnesses that will increase, your the tension in your body, your heart rate, things like that can make you physically feel anxious when
Mm.
you may not have necessarily a lot of fear going on, or it may prompt you to have fear too because of an illness or something like that.
Favorite example of that, by the way, is
Yeah.
actually STDs. So believe it or not, a
Oh,
well-documented finding that you recently got something like gonorrhea, chlamydia, is it's nighttime, you're sweating, you're tossing and turning, you think you have insomnia or you're stressed out about the day, but in reality, you just have a bacteria.
no. So you could have an infection
Yeah,
that's making you have the symptoms, sweating and things like that, and you're thinking, wow, I'm really anxious about something. Yeah.
yeah.
I remember
But in
years
reality,
ago,
yeah,
I mean, decades ago, I called my sponsor and I was really feeling it's like, what's going on with me? And I kept searching for something going on with me. He said, have you taken your temperature?
yeah.
And I said, no. And I did after the phone call, and I had a fever. I was
Uh,
feeling sick, which I interpreted, of course, I would do this, right? Interpreted psychologically when I was simply feeling bad.
yeah, and
So
any
another example.
ordinary physical illness, colds, fever, anything like that can cause you to feel more anxious. Yeah.
Right. Right, certainly. It's the fever itself, the illness itself, or just the illness provoking some fear too.
Yeah.
Either way. And then environment, stress, overwhelming stress, you know, can certainly have a lot to do with feeling anxious. When you're hit with 20 different things at one time, and that's a bad large number, I guess. I shouldn't say so many things at one time. But if you're hit with a number of big things at one time, like you have more bills than you have money to pay, and they're important bills that could cause consequences to you. If you have a big conflict with your spouse or partner, and it could end up in the results of a relationship ending, or at least the fear is of that. Work, getting laid off, losing a job. You look at all the major stressors. Buying a house can be extremely stressful. And there's a whole list of things that have become stressful. Family conflicts, where someone is canceled in the family, and you lose involvement with family. There's all kinds of things that would be considered significant stressors. Can obviously lead to people being afraid and angry, which can cause anxiety, overwhelm the
Mhm.
brain's ability to manage the stressful things that are going on. And then I put another one for causes here, and that's the internalization of the ability to self soothe, the maternal connection or attachment, which I do a lot with a lot of people that had bad early life experiences in terms of their maternal attachment. One of the consequences of that is they don't internalize a sense of comfort. I call it they don't get the coating on the wire. If you look at the brain as a bunch of wires, and if they're without coating or without enough coating, they are sparking all over the place, and that is anxiety. That can raise your heartbeat, cause um, the physical symptoms of anxiety, certainly feel anxious, etc. Some people have a tremendous ability to self-soothe and calm down genetically. Some have really, really wonderful attachments and internalize a sense of comfort, a sense of security that says what I need is going to be there, something bad's going on, it's going to work out okay. They've had those kind of attachments, meaning they're less prone to develop symptoms of anxiety, particularly to the point of a disorder, where it's extreme enough to really start impairing your life. So I thought that was really important. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I mean, there's many psychosocial reasons, situational stressors, relationship difficulties, personality differences, all the things you kind of mentioned, I think are all correct. I think the one thing I'd like to just add to this conversation that's more
Yeah.
general than specific is there's this there's this mistaken belief that I think, or at least I believe it's a mistake, that there's such a thing as no anxiety. And I don't I don't know that that's
Right.
technically true, right? So, and I'm not saying that it's an all or nothing experience. I want to put out there that there's a reasonable assertion we make in some sectors, like researchers like Joseph Ledoux and people like that, that anxiety is more like a dimmer switch and less like an on-off switch. And so really
Nice. Yeah.
what we have is we have more or less of it, and then we have some discrete periods where we have a lot of it, like in the most intense versions of it, like a trauma response or something like that. But most people, I think, have some background, very mild extra cortisol and norepinephrine, things like that, which most people would call anxiety. Um, I think that I have a hard time talking about it like this in particular because the state of being activated and alert and oriented to potential issues in your environment is not inherently what I would call anxiety, even though I think a lot of people,
Right.
because that's in the APA definition, they use the word apprehension, which is about looking out for a threat, right? So, like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
technically literally the case that although many of us live in very safe neighborhoods and things like that, it's also literally the case that accidents happen and things like that. And so I don't know that our brain is designed to be peaceful. I think our brain is designed to be oriented as in a direction and alert as in paying attention to, because taking in information is good for your survival, right? So to me, I wouldn't say there's such a thing as zero anxiety. I would say it's a spectrum or a dimmer switch, if that analogy works for people.
Yeah. I
And
like that.
and I hope people don't have the expectation that they're supposed to be quote unquote calm or something all day. I think the question is, how
Good
alert
point.
are you? What kind, or let's say, what flavor of alert are you? Because you can be alert in a way where you are more mindful and non-judgmental, but you can also be alert in such a way that you're panicky and you think something tragic is about to happen or happening. You can be alert in such a way that you're mildly apprehensive, which most people would call probably anxiety. So I just think it's not to get it too muddy or whatever, just to say that I don't want people to walk away from this conversation with a mistaken belief that anxiety is this problem, number one, and number two, that if you're experiencing any sense of extra alertness or orientation towards a potential problem, that might also be just normal because you live in a circumstance where it's loud outside all the time. And we're not designed to be bombarded by loud noises all the time. We're just not, right? You might tune them out at some point, but
Right.
it's still not good for your nervous system, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, like, the idea that we're alert and oriented towards a potential problem is not in and of itself pathological. I think where it becomes a problem, like the APA said, is when it's excessive, as in outside of your norm, number one. But number two, it's causing notable difficulties in doing everyday things, right?
Yes. Right.
But you should, in my opinion, I know should's a complicated word for us, but I think it is ordinary, removing the word should, I think it is ordinary to have some low level version of being alert and oriented to whatever is happening, and not in the intense version of hypervigilance, in the more like tepid water version of it, where it's like, yeah, there's a thing over there, and I hear and I see and all this stuff, right? So like if
Right.
you're not alert and you're not active, I think something is wrong metabolically usually, you know?
Well, I agree. I think there's people that try to be at quote unquote peace all the time, and you're right. That's not realistic. You just get in a car, you're going to be alert.
Yeah.
You walk out your door. In some neighborhoods, you're going to be really alert. Other neighborhoods, somewhat alert, but in every neighborhood, some alertness. It's all a lot of it's normal. Anybody who has a goal of eliminating all their anxieties, I think, has a very unrealistic goal. Now, I think it's a reasonable goal to eliminate an anxiety disorder, reduce
Sure.
that significantly, so you no longer quote unquote have the disorder.
Yeah.
But if I'm flying a jet across a hostile environment, fighter jet, I'm going to have more adrenaline flowing when I cross that border, when I get within distance of their rockets that could shoot me down. That's normal.
Yeah.
If I walk around in certain areas of St. Louis, I'll guarantee you my pulse rate's going to go up.
Sure.
And other areas it'll go down. Just because of the crime rate, etc. That's all normal stuff. So we're focused on the people that actually it really starts impairing their life, their ability to live and function. Now, the next area. Well, I want to go over types of anxiety. Now, this is not all inclusive, but this is out of our diagnostic manuals. These are some major types of anxiety, and we can kind of give a little bit of difference between the different types. You feel free to comment on these. The big one, generalized anxiety disorder, very common diagnosis for a lot of people, I think, is just like it says, a generalized sense of anxiety that reaches such a level of intensity in impairing your life that it requires treatment. So I'm not going to go through all the symptoms of all of these. That'd be ridiculous, go through all the symptoms. But then number 2, panic disorder, which is I think a lot of people are aware of quote-unquote panic disorders. And that's when your brain gets overwhelmed with anxiety and it begins to short circuit and you have panic attacks where you have extremely high pulse, probably high blood pressure, start sweating. You might feel like you're going to pass out, feel nauseous. And troublesome when people feel those. It's like very uncomfortable, and they certainly want to do something about them for sure. Because they can really impair your ability to function in the world. But are fairly easily treatable, I will say, for most people. We'll come back to that one. Agoraphobia, the fear of going out in the world. Not uncommon. Not a high percent of people experience agoraphobia. We have a relative right now, it is really struggling with it, and so people do struggle with it, and it can cause great impairment if you are afraid to go outdoors. It's easy to see with someone where it's real rational, like a woman got raped brutally. She's got 5 locks on her doors, and she doesn't want to go down the street to Starbucks. She don't want to walk down the street. That fear makes more sense, but people have a hard time imagining, why would I be afraid just to go out? Or some other ones that are really interesting, fear of animals. Fear
Yeah.
of
So
insects.
to go back
Go
to
ahead. Yeah,
to
go
go back
ahead.
to agoraphobia just real quick.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is the specific fear of being helpless out by themselves. So
Okay.
it may or may not have to do with anything trauma related. It
May not.
sometimes does. Yeah.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it sometimes obviously does, but for
Yeah.
some people it's more complicated than that. And so what they have is they have a a mistaken understanding of how unsafe they are by themselves alone out in the world at a park, at a restaurant, waiting in line somewhere on the subway in an elevator,
Right.
so on and so forth. So it's like there's no help that's available to them is the main problem.
You mean
Not that it
the feeling of helplessness.
Right, that's the problem. And it's also in this situation where there's no person to help them specifically. It's both.
Alone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Well,
the alone plus helpless.
when you're alone, you're much more likely to feel helpless. When
Well, some
someone's with
people.
you. Well, yeah, no, yeah, but it's some other ones that were interesting to me that some people who are listening or watching this will be aware of. Some people have phobias of animals, insects, needles. A friend of mine that went through a long 18 years of cancer treatment very successfully had a fear of needles. So every time he had to go do chemo and they hook him up with a needle, he wouldn't look. He just let him put it in him, but he wouldn't look at it because he had a fear of needle. He didn't want to pass out. Some people have a phobia of flying. Elevators, you mentioned. You know, I've had some patients who've had relatives who are afraid of driving over bridges, you know, which I thought was an interesting one too. There's all kinds of phobias, you know, and they're all related, I think, to what you just said. A feeling of helplessness and feeling out of control, you know, which gives them an exorbitant fear that is certainly not rational. Bridges are going to hold you up, elevators work, they even if there's a problem they stop, they freeze and you're safe. You know, and things like planes, same thing. Planes have a lower injury death rate than cars. You know, but people can drive cars, but then are deathly afraid to fly. You know, things like that. You know, and then there's a one that used to be more. I used to hear more about this. I don't know if you hear about this more or not. Social anxiety disorder, just being out in culture, out in the world, and just generally being anxious about interacting with people socially. You know, and it can be very impairing to people to feel so anxious they don't want to interact with people, like they're afraid of people and what might happen and things like that. And then let's see, we have separation anxiety disorder, which kind of says what it is: afraid of separating in a relationship, afraid of moving someplace, you know, things like that. Like sometimes people move from one area to another, they begin to have panic attacks and separation. They felt secure where they were, move to a new area, it's unfamiliar, they feel out of control,
Right.
and start having panic or just anxiety in general, but or severe panic disorder. Physical illness resulting in anxiety. Well, we've touched on that. You know, are any other ones you want to comment on or add to this?
I mean, I think it's not, these aren't technically anxiety disorders because they're their own category. They're also the somatic conditions, and it's complicated because depending upon how you think about it, but the short, non-collegial discussion
You're talking about
is
psychosomatic
yeah, yeah,
conditions.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
illness, anxiety disorder, hypochondriasis, things like that. Like
right.
those are all basically anxiety disorders.
Yeah,
They really
yeah.
are.
And
And
they're
so
not
like
counted
there's
here, but you're right. You're right.
yeah, they're in a different section in the DSM, but basically it's like there are those anxiety disorders. You could also say that eating disorders are technically a version of anxiety disorders. I think
Mm,
that's a more complicated one, but just
yeah.
putting it out there, we can come back and talk about it at some point.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll have to do a
but
whole thing on that one, I think.
yeah, yeah, no, it's an important
Yeah.
topic for sure. Like,
Yeah.
but there's a number of conditions that are technically anxiety disorders, but they're just in a different section of the book. And pathological anxiety is the source of the problem, right?
Right. Right.
So the other thing I'd like to say is a lot of other conditions that we do treat have pathological anxiety. So in a sense, PTSD is a combination of major depression and anxiety. You have this pathological overreaction and underreaction because of the traumatic stress that you experience, right? And so a lot of
Right.
people with something like PTSD will just think they have an anxiety disorder or just problematic
Right.
symptoms of anxiety, for instance. And, you know, also advanced illnesses like Parkinson's disease and major neurocognitive disorders like dementia and Huntington's and things like that. Like these illnesses, which are very biological, right? So
Oh yeah.
Parkinson's is the literal death of dopamine in parts of your motor cortex, right? So like these illnesses actually have the consequence of changes to your mood and your anxiety, sensitivity, and tolerance.
They
And
do.
as you get older, as people get older, they should be aware that if you feel extra anxious out of nowhere for no good reason, that also might be a warning sign
Yeah.
that other parts of your cognitive apparatus are slipping. So, like, everyone becomes very
Wow. Good
concerned
point.
usually, you know, as you get older, as you cross like 60, 70, most people start to have some ordinary memory decline, but a lot of people start to have significant memory decline, but they don't know it. And
Well,
so,
your mom
what
and I are
they'll,
walking today talking about memory decline. We have. Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah,
she's like, yeah, quit. Don't be critical of me. I'm going, dear, you do. I admit it that I can't hear as well, or I can't, without hearing, but memory too.
Yeah, and they'll affect each other. But
Yeah,
like
for sure.
there's the ordinary version of that which can cause ordinary anxiety, but also when you start to develop conditions like Alzheimer's or Huntington's,
Oh yeah.
people will have extra anxiety. And it's actually partially because of brain changes, but it's also partially because you're unconsciously aware that your faculties are slipping and you feel
Right.
concerned, right?
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
for folks that are older, they should be aware that they might have extra anxiety, and your doctor might want to put you on like benzos or something, which is a stupid idea in my opinion, but that's just not a physician, so don't sue me or whatever. So there's a lot of different reasons why people will have extra anxiety. Some of them are age
Sure.
related, some of them are illness related, and some of them are actual just ordinary psychological disorders that we see in the DSM. You
Yeah,
know.
I got you. Good points for people. All right, next section, we're going to get into some natural remedies. You'll be proud of me for going and writing these down.
Okay.
And I reordered this after I wrote it down the first time. The first one, talking to someone
Mm.
you perceive cares about you, that results in feeling less stress, less anxiety, significantly because of the quality of the connection between the two people. And that's the caveat. It has to be a connection where you really feel like you're offloading your fear, offloading your anger, offloading your guilt, offloading your whatever it is that's pushing anxiety symptoms. Can you give that away to somebody and reduce the amount that you're feeling?
I would I challenge the phrase offloading because I think there's two reasons why that might be an issue for people. I think some people definitely have this, Kleinian desire to vomit their anxiety, so to speak.
Declining
Uh,
desire.
it's true, it's vomiting, right? Um, for people who
we'll
are who
get we'll
are
get a little more technical here in a minute, but go
for
ahead.
people who are into the psychoanalytic of it all, that you'll get why I said that. But I also think that another metaphor that might be more tolerable for most people, because people might feel pressure to get rid of all of their anxiety on someone and they don't want to be a burden and all that stuff. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
a slightly more digestible metaphor for people is sharing your anxiety. You're not
yeah,
getting rid
yeah.
of it per se. It's not catharsis. It's not just being, you know, you're not going through a demon possession ritual or something. It's like
No.
you're not experiencing an exorcism. You're experiencing like a sharing of your feelings where you
Well,
both get to talk about it and process it together. So you're not getting rid of it per se. You're just sharing it, so we're both carrying the load together, as it were.
I like my metaphor better because it's actually developmentally, analytically, what a mother does with a young child is we call it digest the feelings for them and give them back to them, which reduces the anxiety. It helps internalize a sense of self-soothing when it's done well. So there is a sense of offloading that you're not carrying all the fear you were before you started the conversation. You're not carrying all the guilt. You're not carrying all the anger. You're not carrying all the loneliness, whatever it might be that is pushing symptoms of anxiety. But sharing is not a bad word. It's a good word. It's just that I'm interested in the results because you and I both know there's a lot of sharing that does not reduce anxiety. It actually
because
may
you don't have
increase
this
it.
because you don't have the same goal, right?
Well, you don't have the experience you need in the sharing that results in lessening anxiety, as I can say in general. There's much more specifics to that depending on who the relationship's with and what happens in that sharing.
That's
And that
that's
and that's the
that's
problem.
that's actually the reason I'm pushing back because I think a lot of people will vomit their anxiety on people with the expectation that they'll just hold it, when in reality, not only do they not have a willing participant to receive the vomit, but also um, it's a mistaken belief that you can quote unquote just get it out, right? So anxiety is not like a foodborne virus. It's not undercooked chicken, right? Your body's not trying to get rid of a parasite. As we were talking about earlier, anxiety is this ordinary thing that can turn into an extraordinary thing. So the idea
Right.
is not to get rid of
Right.
it per se, right? The idea is to make it more tolerable and manageable
Reduce.
together.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
that's why I think I tend to shy away from getting rid of metaphors because Genuinely speaking,
Well,
I don't think
yeah.
it's possible, even in the analytics sense and especially in the Kleinian
No.
sense. I don't
If
think
you
that
take
happens.
No, if you take 25% out, you take 50% out, you could go from disorder to just general anxiety or just a little bit of discomfort. I
Right.
think that's what I mean by that. When I talk to one of my friends, a couple people, but one in particular, generally feel, not all the time, but I generally feel better because he can empathize with how I feel. He understands it. I feel like he really hears me. He's not doing what so many people do, trying to talk over me to get to what he wants to talk about, but really hears me out. And I do feel better. And I don't feel like that in every relationship. Some people don't know how to listen. Some
Agreed.
people don't know how to understand what they're hearing, etc. Like I said in an earlier podcast, why do only a certain number of people in AA sponsor people? Well, because the other ones are too self-centered. They don't know how to listen. They don't know how to pay attention in a way that helps. And generally helps means feel better because addicts are all about how I feel. So feeling better is certainly a priority for that group. So talking with all those caveats that we just gave you can be a really marvelous thing if you're talking to the right person
In the right
and
way.
in the right way. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and they're
Where it's
listening also.
collaborative, where it's
Yes,
collaborative and it's
yeah,
not you just vomiting, just so we're clear.
right. And next one is regular exercise. Definitely
Yes.
been known to reduce anxiety, stress,
Hmm.
anxiety.
Yep. Do
Yoga,
more.
meditation.
Yep.
And by the way, we used to say exercise, make it aerobic, and it's better. But I think any exercise helps reduce stress and anxiety.
Yep.
Aerobic is somewhat better, but it's not necessary for it to be aerobic.
Yeah.
Yoga, meditation are proven. You
Yep.
really feel anxious, do hot yoga. You'll walk out so drained, you're not shaking, your heart's rate down.
Yeah.
You're going to really feel some relief. Deep
Now,
breathing.
to be clear though, like
Yeah.
meditation can also worsen anxiety if you don't know what you're doing.
Oh,
So
meditation. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have moved on so quickly. You're right.
yeah, yeah.
If you're
So
dwelling on the issues, you're going to feel worse.
yeah, so
If you're,
meditation.
go ahead,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, we have research to this effect that meditation can worsen depression and anxiety. So like let's be clear about these are skills that could be useful if you have the right instructor. Sometimes these apps are helpful, but just be careful of doing it on your own because if you've never been taught like how to pay attention on purpose without judgment, you might be just ruminating and obsessing, which will make you feel much, much worse. And
Which,
none of the research on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, for instance, shows that it's the breathing that does anything. It's the metacognition, it's the noticing without judgment piece. And so that is the
gotcha.
harder skill. Breathing is good. Diaphragmatic breathing, box breathing, all those things are good. And it's about attitude. It's about goal and focus. And so you can't just do yoga because you can really hurt yourself doing yoga too. Make sure you have someone who you can like work things out with and talk things through with as you're
Right.
trying these things. But definitely do more for sure.
Yeah, I got you. And I like to say about breathing exercises, it's the exhale that slows that part of the brain down that helps you relax. So you do an inhale and then a slow exhale. And it's the exhale that helps. Remember that. So, but keep the whole thing slow,
Yeah,
you
different
know.
types of breathing have different purposes. Diaphragmatic breathing is more about directly making you feel calmer, whereas box breathing is about teaching yourself the psychological trick that you can withstand distress.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with box breathing.
That's
Yeah,
what the
okay.
Marines used.
I got you. Okay, cool. Use of essential oils such as lavender, chamomile. Can you put it in the air in your room you're in? They can sometimes have some properties that help calm you down. Some people journaling. By the way, I want to go back to meditation. If you do it wrong, it'll make things worse. Well, talking to someone can be the same exact thing too. You can
Agreed.
talk to someone and build up your anger, build up your fear instead of reducing them.
Hmm.
It's important to note that, so don't so you understand these things. Journaling can help. Can you get it out and
Mm.
leave it in the journal, or do you journal and ruminate too and feel worse because you're journaling too? It's the same principle. And then the last one I came up with was prayer. can you have a relationship with God where you feel like you're not alone? The closer I feel to God in His presence, the calmer everything is. When I found out how bad off my friend was the other night, I just sat and prayed, and I just got close to God, and I slept great. I had some peace in me about whatever His will is for my friend. For me, it'd be a great loss. Obviously, a great loss for him if he wants to be here in this world, obviously, still, and stuff. But I felt a sense of peace about that. Now, there was another part of me that was kind of churning my guts, but I was able to sleep really well. So those are some. I don't know if you have any other ones you want to add to the list of some natural remedies that help anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like non-professional things to do,
Yeah,
going for walks can be useful.
amen.
Um,
You bet.
I mean, this is probably going to sound silly to some people, but get a hug, you know?
Oh no, no,
Um,
you're right. Yeah,
um, and then, sauna, things like that, steam rooms can probably help. You have to be careful, obviously, because not everyone is, you know, um, healthy enough to do longer term. Some people, um, it's interesting. Most people think that Scientologists, as this is going to sound completely absurd, like a random tangent, but one of my favorite things about Scientologists, even though they hate us, um, is they have their own versions of rehab. I don't know if you know that. And their versions of
yeah.
rehab are fascinating. What they do is they take people detoxing from various drugs and having withdrawal symptoms like opiate withdrawal. I just have a case of this in my head, a patient who had really bad opioid use disorder. And, for those of you who don't know, it's not necessarily life-threatening when you're coming off of opioids. It feels terrible, like you're
Feel
dying and
horrible.
you
Yeah,
and you have the
yeah,
flu and
yeah,
anxiety and things
yeah.
like that. And so what they do at their rehabs, at their non-psych med rehabs, is they just fill you up with a bunch of water and vitamins, but then they sweat you out all day. Like they make you forcibly sit in saunas all day, which is absolutely fascinating. And it actually works. Like it's miserable for the first couple of days, but once you're at like day 4 or 5, most people actually start to like it. And so, not that I'm a huge fan of that particular belief system and their opinions on things, but I think there's something to be said for sweating things out and exhausting yourself, just like
I
hot
gotcha.
yoga. Um, I would say that a lot of people with anxiety do things like sublimate, for those of you who are technically inclined. And so it can be useful to take your energy that's problematic and put it into useful things like working, cleaning the garage, cleaning the house, so on and so forth. I think that's perfectly a-okay as a temporary approach.
I agree. Good, good points. Okay. Now treatment remedies. We don't want to spend. These are pretty obvious, but we
Yeah.
spend a lot of time on them. And medicines.
Yeah.
Medicines. The sedative area drugs are the usual drugs of choice. Medicines for anxiety. There are specific ones for panic attacks, generalized anxiety, etc. Um, so that's and it's I don't know about you, son. I know a lot of my patients have gone to their personal physician and gotten medicines for anxiety and depression. I don't like that. I know it's easier to get in and see somebody, but matching medicine to people is an art, not
It
just a
is.
science. It's an art.
Yeah, it's an
And
art.
psychiatrists have the experience seeing hundreds of people where they kind of get an idea what kind of personality, what kind of background might match best with a particular medicine. But medicines can be powerful and really help calm anxiety down.
Mm,
Do I recommend that you stay on them for a long period of time? No. I recommend you figure out and deal with your anxiety, what's making you anxious, and deal with that. And the most recommended thing is a combination of psychotherapy/counseling and medicine. And
sure.
eventually you can hopefully give up the medicine. I had a lady called me up, wanted psychotherapy. Well, she just found out she got a bunch of little kids and her husband just got a diagnosis of cancer.
Mm,
And she began to have panic attacks. And I said, well, you can take medicine. If you come see me, it may take a while for you to start calming down
mm,
and for them to subside. It could
mm,
happen that way. But if there's no clinical reason why you can't take medicine, and she said, no, I'm not an, I asked her, are you an alcoholic, having addiction issues? And she said, no. And I said, well, and she didn't like medicine, the idea of medicine, but I said, but it's going to work immediately. And you are going to get relief, and hopefully things will unfold with your husband well, and treatment will go well, and things like that. And then you can just ease off the medicine. So she chose medicine. I said, you can come back, you can try it. You can give me a call if you want to try psychotherapy. You know what I'm saying? But oftentimes when people don't have an addiction background, they're quite available to take medicine for something like that on a short-term basis, and it can be really helpful, particularly for panic attacks.
So, just a couple of things as the guy who teaches psychopharmacology here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's basically four categories of medications that you might be considered to take whenever you see a psychiatrist or your GP, unfortunately. So, probably the first line of choice for most people with problematic anxiety are SSRIs. So, medications like Lexapro, for instance,
Well, you're
are
talking about
often,
antidepressants.
yes. So
Okay.
but yes, I understand why you call them antidepressants. It's better to call them SSRIs because the way psychiatry is moving, we're trying to stick to what kind of molecule it is more than what disorder it was FDA approved to treat, if that makes sense.
Well, I would
So,
call them, just so you know, clinically, I would call them, I would tell patients, there's some antidepressants that actually the side effect is they calm you down.
in this
Wellbutrin used
case,
to be one of those.
yeah, that's a more complicated drug, but yeah, so
Yeah.
certain types of antidepressants, if you want to call them that, or SSRIs, usually are pretty good at helping people with moderate to mild anxiety. So if you have a diagnosis like GAD or something like that, you might get like a Lexapro, for instance. The second category are beta blockers. So beta blockers are literally just blocking the body's ability to experience physical tension. So your brain doesn't interpret those physical signals as anxiety. They're actually not doing anything with the cognitive symptoms of anxiety. They're just managing your body's physical arousal and you don't interpret because that's how anxiety works for a lot of people is we start reading these somatic symptoms and we just create this positive feedback loop to feel worse and worse and worse.
Right.
So
Right.
for panic, for different types of things, you might get beta blockers. Another
Right.
type of medication you'll get are allergy medications. So,
That's true. That's true.
yes. So,
Yeah.
over-the-counter medications are sometimes used, like literally Benadryl, because Benadryl is
Benadryl,
just a standard
popular one.
antihistamine.
Yeah.
But then there are prescription antihistamines like Vistaril and Atarax and things like that, which are literally very much the same thing as Benadryl. And so people will use Benadryl to help with insomnia and difficulty sleeping. People will use Tylenol PM, which just has Benadryl in it. People will get
Correct.
Vistaril for anxiety, especially in like detox settings where they have anxiety from detox. So anti-allergy medications are also used to manage anxiety. And finally, the
Yeah.
most problematic category are the sedatives, like benzodiazepines, and the similar to benzo meds like Ambien and stuff. So
In the old days,
all
barbiturates and yeah,
barbiturates are so toxic they're almost never used anymore, except
yeah,
for
yeah.
alcohol detox. And
Well,
that's
they're
why
rarely
benzos,
used there too. But
yeah, yeah, and anymore.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
exactly, by the way, his fun history fact. That's why benzos were created because barbiturates were so toxic that people were losing their memory and having kidney problems and liver problems back in the 40s and 50s. And so pharmaceutical industry was trying to do the right thing and make something less toxic, which they did, to be fair. But it's still a problem. Most benzos, most sedatives are really bad for you. They cause
Well,
memory issues.
you may be going to say this, but I would say that the first three categories are much safer than the sedatives,
Yes,
the
sedatives have a
pharmaceutical
high
sedatives.
sedatives like
And you can stay on them for
benzodiazepines.
longer periods of time, like the SSRIs.
Yeah, and the allergy
Yeah.
meds are relatively
Yeah.
harmless for most people, right? So,
Relatively, right.
yeah, yeah. Everyone's built a little different, but like most people aren't going to have too
Right.
many problems with a
Right.
Benadryl. So, those are the four categories of meds. Be extra cautious usually when it comes to benzodiazepines because generally speaking, those extra sedating medications like Xanax, Valium, Ativan produce high tolerance and withdrawal and can cause memory loss and withdrawal symptoms that are life-threatening. And so be
Amen.
extra
Right.
careful. Yeah.
Yeah, follow your doctor's direction. You don't stop SSRIs. You don't stop real sedative medication abruptly.
Nope,
You
there's
do
always a
not.
withdrawal period. There's a taper
That's
period.
correct. It'll
Yeah,
mess up your brain, mess up, could kind of have some seizures. With sedatives, you could potentially have a seizure,
and die.
you know? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So be very careful with those kind of things.
yeah. Please don't ever
Well,
taper by yourself.
yeah, no, people are sometimes don't pay attention to that with SSRIs or sedatives.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
so
Yeah.
anyway, but well, I hope this gives you guys some overview of anxiety disorders, natural remedies, symptoms, and professional remedies. We all, of course, I want to sell psychotherapy as a real help to people that have long-term anxiety, that figure out what's going on inside of them.
Hmm.
By how can you reduce stressors? How can you increase coping? How can you increase maybe the ability to self-soothe, things like that, to give you a more long-term permanent solution to anxiety disorders. Disorders.
On that particular note, just real quick, you said this earlier, so I want to make sure it's highlighted again.
Okay.
Almost all anxiety disorders are disorders that are caused and maintained by pathological avoidance. So medications can be used to avoid. Defense mechanisms can be used to avoid. Unhealthy relationships and habits can be used to avoid. So one of the reasons why seeing a therapist can be helpful is because they'll help you identify patterns where you're engaging in pathological avoidance, right?
Correct.
That's the mechanism that
Yep.
maintains the illness. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for underlining that.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be it for today's podcast on anxiety, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks for listening to Encouragement for Living Life. We hope you were encouraged by today's discussion. If you have a question, you can email us at lockwoodwithlockwood@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it on one of our shows. Hope to see you next time.